Parenting is hard. Few of us feel up to the task. The world is shifting, quickly and dramatically. All of us feel the changes affecting our families. The stress and pressure can be intense. We are here to help sort the good and the bad, provide insight, and bring hope. Welcome to Brilliantly Brave Parenting. We're so glad you stopped by.
Hi, I'm Pastor Brad Mathias. I want to welcome you to Brilliantly Brave Parenting, the podcast.
Hey there, I'm Robert Beeson, and we're really glad that you joined us today.
Yes, we are. Robert.
Yeah.
We've been talking about Maine a little bit.
A little bit. That's all you talk about.
Well, I mean, it's kind of new to me.
Yeah.
And when you experience new things, you
That's
sort
true.
of fixate on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you find that really good cereal that you've been looking for, like Cinnamon Life.
Okay.
Oh,
I'll trust you on that.
That stuff's just, You know how I found it?
How?
My grandson.
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Cinnamon Life is my new favorite cereal. You don't even need milk. You can just chew on that stuff. It's really good.
Okay.
Try it.
I'll
Give it a whirl if you like cinnamon.
Yeah.
It's like little cinnamon toast, but not too sweet or sugary.
Huh.
Kind of nice.
Okay.
You can put him in a Ziploc bag, go anywhere and be happy, just like his 18-month-old self.
Okay.
So
Well, that's what we got for you today.
Yeah,
on
that's
Brilliantly Brave.
So there's a little tidbit for those who have toddlers. Robert, you've been all over. You've been developing a new ministry, Solo Parent Society, and one of the questions I have for you: what are you reading? What's inspiring you literarily?
Well, you got me into being an Audible junkie.
Oh,
And so I have just been, since I found that, because I'm not a good, sit down and, when I have time to read, I never have a book with me. And so the Audible thing has really changed my life. So I'm doing 3-4 books a month, which before it'd be one a year. And so I vacillate between fiction and nonfiction. One of the most interesting books that I read recently was a book by the Arbinger Institute. It's not an author, it's an institute. And it's called The Anatomy of Peace. I went to a conference and I sat next to this guy and he said, you got to read this book. It will change your perspective on world affairs, everything. Anyway, The Anatomy of Peace, it's about how to deal with conflict with people, with your kids, and it's written in a way that's not like a self-help book. It's really interesting. It's just telling a fictitious story, but you relate to the characters in the story. And I learned so much about conflict, about what conflict is and how to manage it. And it's called The Anatomy of Peace. I could not recommend it highly enough. It's fantastic.
wow.
So,
That's
anyway,
strong. That's strong. Well, I think for parents who are listening, learning how to resolve conflict is a big deal.
Well, one of the things that it focuses on, it takes place, the kind of scenario is these parents that have all brought their kids to a wilderness kind of camp. Parents have lost hope in some cases because their kids are just doing drugs, they're doing whatever, and so they take them to this wilderness thing, and then there's 2-day intensive with these leaders where the parents all meet. And so it actually is centered around relating to your kids and relating to each other. But there's so many parallels throughout the business world or whatever. So I seriously can't recommend it highly enough. The Anatomy of Peace.
And you listened to it on Audible.
I did. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the cool things about technology is that we can engage with different people that are in completely different places.
And this is true.
Yeah.
And today I'm really excited about our guest, Lori Schumacher. She's a blogger, she's an author, and I'm really excited about this topic. So we want to welcome to the show. First of all, Lori, we're so glad that you're joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I love this idea of surrendered hearts, and none of us get to the place where to surrender it would indicate that there's something to surrender from or to or whatever, and it's never comfortable. And I know that your journey walked you through some very trying times. Tell our listeners a little bit about the adoption story and how you learned to trust.
I'd say each step of the adoption process was a stage of surrender. It was kind of like a layer, like an onion, peeling away those layers. But the heart of the surrender came a year into the process of actually after we'd filed our original paperwork. The years before, of course, involved, praying for my husband's heart to align with where I was in wanting to adopt, and praying for financial things to happen in our family where my husband felt comfortable that we could embark on another huge debt. because international adoption is very expensive. So, there was so many layers of surrender, but the heart of it came a year after we'd filed paperwork and we were waiting to be matched. So the Ministry of Justice in Bulgaria has all your paperwork. I mean, like inches and inches of thick paperwork, just a file of everything about you, your family, and every background check you can possibly imagine. I mean, every detail in the world is in that. And so they have that, and they are trying to match the families up with children that become available. And so we felt, interestingly, my husband and I had felt that we were not really that equipped to be special needs parents. There were some minimum ones. I mean, I'm a teacher by trade. I have worked with young children and in development. Have a master's in bilingual and multicultural education. So there were some things. The language thing was not a scary thing for me. Speech was not a scary thing for me. There are some things and that we felt we were comfortable with. But God always knows so much more, doesn't He? Mm-hmm. He knows what we're capable of far beyond what we know. And so we were just waiting for that. But in the meantime, I would get emails from the adoption agency. I can't remember exactly, but I think it's weekly. And they would send out emails of children that had children in that they were advocating for in an extra way because they all had special needs. And it's sadly, it's difficult to find families for children with special needs. And I understand why, but it's still a sad circumstance. But so the adoption agencies are allowed to be proactive for these children. So we would get the emails and I would always open them. I would always read the children's stories and their bios and I would pray for them. But I never felt anything in me beyond that compassion for these children. Nothing that would change our course. And then one morning I open up my email and staring at me is this face of this little girl. And it was a Holy Spirit moment. It just a heat wave from head to toe. The tears just started pouring and I couldn't stop them. I was shaking and I was in that moment. I was convicted that was the little girl that was meant to be ours. At that point, I didn't know why she was in a special needs listing, what her special needs were at anything. All I had seen was the picture. So she was just the face that I had in my mind, maybe since I was a little girl, that of the one that would be my daughter someday. It was just the most amazing moment, one that I can relive again and again. The moments when I'm really frustrated with my daughter right now, I stare at her and I'm like, you are the little one God meant for me. But so, I did the research, found out what she had as special needs. It was very minimal. It was something I thought, wow, we probably could handle this. But I was terrified to tell my husband that, she's on a special needs list. Was he going to be completely opposed to that since we had decided we probably weren't that equipped? But I showed my husband her picture that evening and I got our boys to bed, the house quiet, and I made him promise me. I said, Brian, you're going to look at this, please. And I don't want you to say a single word until you fully look at her picture and read all of it. Don't make any judgments. Don't talk, nothing. He said, all right. And so he didn't even need to read the paper. He saw her face and had that same feeling. And, and guys, they have that Adam apple that kind of goes up and down to kind of curb the, that's what was going on with him. And I knew that he felt the same way. So, of course, I just started crying all over again. So that was our first day, our first moment. We were convicted. So he said, get going tomorrow morning, first thing, call our caseworker and get this moving. So I did that the next morning, filed all the miles of paperwork that we had to do to finalize this process. And all we were waiting for was a meeting from the Ministry of Justice. So they have their bi-monthly meetings and they would take all the applications and then just kind of stamp them with their approval. So it was kind of just a formality. Although our caseworker did say, Lori, guard your heart because anything can happen in the world of adoption. And we go into that and they train you to know that. And we all know that as parents, we know that anything can happen, that there are surprises around every corner. And so I somewhat braced myself, but yet I was so convicted that this child was meant to be ours that I didn't have that much concern at all. I was simply waiting that morning for the phone call from our caseworker to tell us, all right, it's approved. Here's your travel dates. This is when you're going to be picking up your daughter. And so the phone call came in, and as soon as I heard her voice, she didn't even have to say it. I knew something was wrong. And she said, "Lori, I'm so sorry. It's not good news. I don't know how or why or what, but your Selah," because we gave her the name Selah in our hearts. That's the name God had given us for her. Your Selah was adopted by an Italian family.
Wow.
And yeah, and I just, of course, I was crying right there on the phone, and I was just in disbelief. Am I hearing you right? Are you playing an awful joke on me? There's got to be a miscommunication. And I wouldn't let her hang up because I kept waiting for her to get another email or something that was going to tell her that she'd gotten the wrong information. So I hung up, and I had a couple of my dearest girlfriends coming over, and they had been planning to come over to celebrate, but they came over and got my news. So they were a godsend to be there with me in those moments. And our family was devastated. Our little boys were devastated. They'd already loved their sister and were talking about when she's going to be coming home, and we're ready to come home from school and celebrate. I gave my husband the news over the phone, and he couldn't believe it. He was in shock. And so, the next 6 months, it was grief. It was this profound grief. And for those people who have not ever adopted, God does something in your heart when he calls you to adopt. And he makes you love a child the same way as you would love a child that was birthed within you. So it doesn't matter if they grow in your heart or in your womb. You love them. He gives you that mother's love. And I've suffered a miscarriage before, and I can honestly say that the grief I felt in that moment was very comparable to the grief I felt when we got that phone call. And so for the next 6 months, I grieved, but I wouldn't let it go. I said, "God, you convicted me of this. Why? Why would you convict me of this? Why would you convict our whole family? Why do I love her so passionately, yet she's not meant to be ours? I can't believe this." And so I kept wrestling with him with that. And then it came to one weekend, and my husband went away with the boys to give me a weekend alone, to really just pray and think and try to heal, because he knew I was holding on to this grief in a way that wasn't healthy anymore. And so that weekend, that's what I did. I prayed and dug deep into the word. And I finally got to this point where I knew I needed to surrender. And I said, "Okay, God, she's yours. She was yours long before she was mine. Even though she's all the way over in Bulgaria, she's not mine. She's still yours. And I'm giving her back to you. And if the Italian family is who's meant to be her parents, I'm going to celebrate that with you, because that's what you've designed. And if you've only put her in my life so that I can pray for her for the rest of my days, then I'm going to count that a gift. And I'm going to praise you for allowing me to be her prayer warrior forever."
Wow.
And I may never know the answer as to why I wasn't allowed to be her mom, but I'm going to praise you for allowing me to pray for her. And I can say that weekend that I got to the place of accepting that, to that, that grief, the process of grief. I got to the acceptance of saying, "Okay, I can do this." And I wholeheartedly surrendered. I didn't just surrender in word. I surrendered all of it. And the miracle in it is that once I surrendered, it was merely a week later that God began to work, and miracles began to happen.
So talk to us about that. What was happening to Selah this entire time? Was she aware of you, or was this just like a one-sided, you were aware of her and moving down the road?
One-sided.
Okay.
She had no idea about us at that time. So her story is that she was placed in the orphanage upon birth. So she never lived in a family at all. So She was in one orphanage, and then had, at the age of just shy of 3, she was moved to another orphanage. And so she was just spending that time sadly in orphanages without a lot of love.
Wow. So fast forward a little bit. What ended up happening when you decided to surrender and you said that a miracle took place?
Well, to save some time and to leave a teaser for the book, I will say that what happened is that God brought me together with a woman in Hawaii, a woman in Ohio, through an international chat group of thousands of people, and a random comment that I happened to make. I'm not at that point. I wasn't a big blogger or anything. I had a little family blog, but I wasn't comfortable on any kind of social media that much. So I wasn't much of a commenter or very active. I'd read and take in the information. But I happened to email this one woman whose story really stood out to me. And she was such an encouragement in a place that can get kind of negative where people are really frustrated with the system. And I happened to email her and say, thank you for being such a positive person in this. And I've loved your story, and God bless you on your daughter and everything that you have going on. And, she started a friendship with me. I didn't expect her to respond. But through that woman, I was eventually connected to another woman in Hawaii who, it turns out, very long story short, Selah was not adopted by an Italian family. The paperwork fell through immediately.
Wow.
And then the country, and then Bulgaria, because this woman in Hawaii knew somebody somebody within the government and in Bulgaria, and that this other woman had been wanting to adopt, and they took compassion on her story. They didn't bring Selah's case back up to the board to put us and the other person in front of the board to match her, to approve, to give us a chance to be approved again. What they did is kind of under the table gave this woman the right to adopt this daughter, this little girl. And then this woman had gone over to Bulgaria to meet Selah, because it's a 2-trip program. So you go one time for a week to meet and spend time, and then you go before the court and say, yes, I do want to adopt. And then you wait for them to process paperwork again, and you go back after they do that and you pick up your child. So she'd gone over and she spent the week with Selah, and she couldn't bond with her. And that entire week, she ended up feeling like, I'm really not meant to be her mom. And she was grieving over that, but she realized Selah had some extra special situations that she was going to need help in, some extra special needs, and she was going to need a lot more help than she was able to provide as well. She's a single mom. And so at the point when we were ultimately connected, she had just turned in the paperwork to say, I can't adopt her. And when I called our caseworker the morning that I put all these pieces together, and in the book I go through all of the stories, because it's over like another month span that this takes place. And this is also like 7 months after we'd already lost her.
No, yeah.
And so when I call our caseworker, who thinks that I'd lost my mind and just was she said, Lori, honey, she's adopted a long time ago. I'm like, please, I haven't lost my mind. Please trust me. I can't tell you all the details because you're not even supposed to be having these conversations. Bulgaria can pull your rights to adopt if you're talking about all this during the adoption. You're not supposed to be communicating with other parents. It's very strict. And so I was nervous to give anybody facts or to put anybody in a position where they could get in trouble with anything. So I just said, please trust me. Don't ask me any questions, but check on her file, please. So she called me back within a few hours and she said, Lori, you're not going to believe this, but Selah's file was on a desk in the Ministry of Justice, and it was in the file that was about to be put in the file cabinet of the unadoptable.
Wow.
And that's the case, the cabinet that never gets opened again. And these children just stay in the system. Yes.
That's amazing. Well, go on.
So we find out, and then the story, it still gets even more layers of surrender and surrender and surrender. And then even after we come home, surrender again. So, that whole piece of surrender is just so critical in parenting, in any story, in anything you ever face, because I think sometimes we're holding on to things so tightly and wanting to control it and wanting it to be the way we want it, that we don't allow the room for God to come in and do his miracles. If we really trust him, we need to make room in our life for him to work.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, Lori, I'm thinking of the applications for any family in any situation. It is always a temptation for us to try and seize control, or what we think is control, of situations that we really, really want to happen. And it is such a leap of faith. It's literally like getting out of a boat and walking on water to say, I am going to surrender my plans for your will. And it sounds like you've done that, and it has not only turned out better, but it turned out to be exactly God's will for you. And that was about 7 years ago. Is that correct?
Well, actually, just in about 10 days, we'll be celebrating our 8-year anniversary of bringing her home. Wow. So it would have been, from when all that, because it was still another, from the time we found out, it was almost a year. From the time I made that connection with those ladies, it was almost a year before we were able to bring her home, because, again, even between our visits, when we got over there to meet Selah, and then we were told that it would only be a 3 to 4 month wait to go back and get her, we had every adversity come against us yet again. And it was 7 months before we were able to get back to her. And, another level of trusting God and surrendering, because there, even today, our daughter has a lot more special needs than we anticipated. And she is a lot more emotionally scarred. And the last few months that she was there, she was a very sick little girl and not getting the attention she needed, and was going through a lot of abuse. And I asked God, why was she there? Why did you not get her to us quicker? Why could we not get to her? But through it all, God showed me again and again that he made it happen for a purpose. Of course, when I come face to face with him, I'm going to have some questions about that, because there's some things we don't get the answers to. There's some things we see in hindsight. We get to see those answers and we see him put the picture together, but sometimes we don't. And that's we just have to give those back to him and trust him enough to, if we could trust him to make the miracles happen before, we can trust him to say that even in this where we don't see the miracle, he's still good and the story is good.
I think what's remarkable about your story, I mean, there's so many facets of it that I think are remarkable, but God gave you a dream. God even identified a person. And throughout it all, like there was adversity, as you call it, and frustration and disappointment. You kept faithful and going, no, I believe that God put that. I don't quite understand this or whatever. And I think it's like, I think about my own life and thinking when God speaks something or something is evident that it is God's will or God's moving, at that point I kind of figure, okay, I've got it from here, God. And really God's intention is to walk us through being patient with the process. And so often we jump to the conclusion before we allow dynamics to unfold that shape our character and shape who God wants us to become. What would you say to the person out there that has a very strong indication that God has something for them or has made something clear? Maybe it's a calling, maybe it's an outcome, whatever it is. And then they feel like, okay, was that really from God? Because I felt like it was from God, and yet it seems like everything is coming against me. I know that in my own life, I can see that over and over, and God's wanting the process to kind of unfold. But what would you say to the person out there that is feeling like God placed something in their heart, but it's just not coming to fruition?
I would say a couple of things. First, check that conviction that you have. Check it. Does it align with the Word of God? Mm-hmm. Is it something, that would come from God? And if so, if that's true, then hold on, just stay faithful to him and just keep following where you feel him leading. And and not just on a whim. Let's not, I don't want to ever advise somebody to just like go by your feelings, because our
Right.
feelings are
Of
not
course.
truth, right? They lead us astray. Keep whatever you're feeling convicted, keep aligning that with the word of God. See if that's true. And then keep taking that next step where he follows. And even if that dream that you have is a conviction, and you in your humanity have formed that dream and put a vision and a look to it in one certain way, know that it may look different, but even if it's different, it can be so much better. And it can be something that is far beyond our imagination. Like another part of an example of that is that, after we got our daughter home, my dream of what life was going to be like with our daughter is not at all what my life is like with my daughter at all. And, I thought I had been a teacher for many years. I had worked with children in ministries for so many years. I had 2 boys myself. I saw children and got the whole parenting and teaching thing really well.
Mm-hmm.
This little girl was a brand new experience, and her needs were so profound, and it did turn our family upside down again. And I had to learn once again that my dream wasn't wrong. God didn't place the dream to adopt, and I was wrong about it. God didn't place the dream to this little girl and this little face and convict me of that, because I was wrong in misreading that with him. It all was preparation for the fullness of the dream, and for who our family is today, and the kind of mom and the faith that's strengthened. I mean, we are a completely different family because of this adoption and because of this little girl in our family, and becoming a special needs family for her. And that's a dream that was far beyond anything I could have ever imagined.
Yeah.
Well, as we've been listening, this is a really, really profoundly intimate insight into the struggles of adoption. And for families that are listening right now, there are probably several who are prayerfully considering if God's calling them to adopt a child, either internationally or domestically. Where would you recommend parents who are seeking more information to go? Are there any resources or links that you recommend, Lori?
I have a ton. And if people would go to my website at lorischumacher.com, I have on the page, or you can click the link to the book, so it has the Surrendered Hearts book. On that page, I have a whole bunch of free resources that you just click on it and it gives you the PDF and you can print it right off. And so some of those are prayers and scriptures and those kind of resources, just to help you during your wait, to learn to surrender, to learn to have patience, to wait well, all those kinds of things. Those adversities that you face during adoption. So they're those kind of resources. But then a lot of the resources also are lists of websites I would go to, and of books and of classes, and all kinds of just abundance of different resources that any family could access. And so those are all free. They just go to that page, and each one, it's in the margin over on the right-hand side, and it's there's like a printable there's a whole packet I have there for anybody, and you don't have to buy the book or anything. You can just go there and click on them and download them.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Lori, for spending time with us today. Your story is inspiring, and I'm so glad that the outcome, even though it still continues to unfold and be something a little different than what you expected, but that you were united with her, and that she was able to join your family. I admire you so much for what you've done, and grateful for you taking the time to share your story with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I hope and pray that people are encouraged, to surrender, and in and of itself, the book, like you said at the beginning, it's about learning to surrender, not just simply an adoption story and for adopting families, but anything you face, and during your parenting, learning to surrender to certain things that you have to face as a parent. So I hope it encourages and points others to Jesus.
I'm sure it will. Thank you for taking time.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you.
bless. We are excited to announce the Storms of Life study, Living Beyond Stressed Out and Overwhelmed.
It's a great subtitle, Living Beyond Stressed Out and Overwhelmed.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we know that students are stressed. And for parents and pastors, it's important to know what are the top 3 things that are really on the minds of our kids.
So Brad, walk us through what they can expect from the Storms of Life.
This is an 8-week study. It has video insights. It has presentations from an actual youth retreat with junior high and high school students. These kids are going to learn about how their faith can help them fight back the stress that they're living with every day at school.
Check it out on ishinelive.com.
All right, Robert. Well, that was going fast. She covered a lot of ground there.
She did. I mean, her story is remarkable. And honestly, I don't know if I was faced with that call that she got, I think I would probably be tempted. I'm sure she was tempted, but to throw in the towel and go, okay, well, I don't,
Yeah.
But the fact that she just kept believing that that's what God wanted, but she surrendered it and said, if my place in this isn't to be her parent, but to be a prayer warrior for her for the rest of life, so be it. I mean, I think so often, I say this often, that like if God gives us a dream in our heart or a conviction, we see that as a destination. And so we get so wrapped up in that, well, it must mean this, it must mean this, it must mean this. And really it's about the preparation for what God really has us. It may not be exactly. And so we can't hold to like the exact things as much. And I love the fact that she did that. She said, I still believe that I was brought into Selah's life, but maybe it was something different. If so, I surrender to that. I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah, a couple things that I want to be really clear with our listeners, just for the sake of the ministry position on some of this. Surrendering to God doesn't necessarily mean you'll get what you want.
Exactly.
That I don't want them to hear this story and go, okay, well, I'm going to surrender this, and then God will give it back to me.
Right.
It's not a business deal.
Right.
This is a transaction of the heart, and
Right.
so God knows those things. I couldn't help but notice that there was at least 14, 15 months in this journey of waiting for her.
Of not knowing, of
Yeah.
waiting, like you said.
So, the remarkable tenacity that she showed in trusting God for this little girl is pretty cool. And it sounds like a mother's heart.
Right.
Yeah. So thanks for hanging out with us today. We've been talking with Lori Schumacher. She is a blogger, and she's an author, and she's an adoptive mother of a Bulgarian girl, and her story is available on our website. We have links and information on how to get a hold of her and all of those cool resources that would help any family that's considering adoption.
That's right. Thank you so much for joining in. Listen, if it would mean the world to us if you would go on to our podcast and subscribe and get involved with the conversations that we're having. We appreciate everything that you guys are going through as families, and we certainly are with you in that. And so if you think about it, go and leave a comment on iTunes or on SoundCloud, wherever you listen to this podcast. We really appreciate you, and thanks for spending a little time with us.
God bless. We'll see you right here next week.
Be encouraged, parents, you are not alone. In Paul's letter to his son in the faith, Timothy, he writes, "But I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me." Brilliantly Brave Parenting wants to be an encouragement and support that parents can rely on. Would you consider liking us and sharing us with a friend? As a part of the Tween Gospel Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization dependent on the support of friends like you. Thanks for stopping by. We'll be right here next week.
Brad, you know I'm a foodie, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to tell you about this awesome coffee experience. It's called CJ's Coffee Culture and Community. It is a faith-run coffee culture. And the thing that's really cool about this is that they roast their own beans, they have delicious coffees, and they have 2 brick and mortar, so 2 coffee bars, as well as a virtual location at cjscoffeecafe.com. Here's the cool thing. They ship their beans, they ship their coffee anywhere in the world, so you don't just have to be in Texas to enjoy it. CJ's Coffee Culture and Community.
Awesome. Hey, Robert, we've got some new stuff in the web store.
Tell me about it, Brad.
It's our very own swag.
Really?
Absolutely. Brilliantly Brave now has its own line of caps, cups,
T-shirts,
clothing. Yeah, everything, man. We got swag.
Dog sweaters?
I don't know about the dog sweaters yet, but we can work on it.
Okay.
So if you're a fan and you've been listening to Brilliantly Brave and you want to share it with your friends, let them know that you're a supporter, hey, come to our website, ishinelive.com, and find out more.